That was my superior at the phone, so I wouldn't just say, I'm sorry, I'm busy. It's one of the joys of being a Franciscan. So, well, thank you everybody for being here this afternoon. This is a great opportunity for me to share a little bit about St. Francis and St. Clare. First of all, because I love them so much, to the point that I gave my life to their spirit, along with St. Rita and our brothers and sisters that you see around with their robes, but also many others who consecrated their lives to live according to their spirit. And I hope that a little bit of their spirit will be in each one of our hearts, because they're amazing people, and I will share with you a little bit of their story. And there is so much that can be said. I will try to summarize just the most important points, so it's not too long, because I've been invited not to take too much of your time. So if I get too long, you just wave. That will be my forbidden sign that I have to get a shot already. My goodness. Let's see if I can bring everything together. Okay, well, St. Francis and St. Clare, two amazing people, two great saints in the church, known all over the world. St. Francis was born in 1182 or 1181. It's unclear. At the time, it wasn't the custom to have things signed so precisely, and so we remain with this doubt. 1181 or 1182. Clare, she was born in 1194. She was younger than St. Francis, 12 years younger. They were both born in Assisi, which is a small town in the center of Italy. Those who had the chance to go and visit probably remember this little ancient medieval town just on the side of a hill. And for those who didn't, you can see pictures on the internet, or maybe one day we can organize a pilgrimage and it would be great to go together. Who were they? Because there is a lot that needs to be said, and some things that have been said that we need to rectify a little bit. And the first one is that between Francis and Clare there was a romance, which is unfortunate because it's a nice story, but they knew each other probably since when they were children, because the town is small, it's very small. But St. Francis, he was the child of a merchant. St. Clare, she was the child of a noble. So in those times, those who were a noble, they didn't talk with those who were. There was a very strong separation between the two groups. St. Francis belonged to a merging part of Assisi society, the merchants. And his father, he had a shop, and he was trading with silk and beautiful fabric that he used to go to buy in France to bring back to Italy and to sell for a higher price, because they were bringing something exotic. They were in business, they know how that works. You find something good, you bring it back to your place, and people, they have an interest. So that's how you get your profit. And his father, he was very good, very, very good at what he did. And so he was a wealthy man. He had a few houses in Assisi. He had lots of land around Assisi in the countryside. But still, he wasn't a noble, was a member of the people, the common people of Assisi. Clare, she was the daughter of Freduccio di Favarone, of the Scifi family. It was a very important noble family in Assisi. They were part of the lineage of ancient knights. They even fought in the Holy Land, and they gained their title fighting. They were, we call that the nobility of the sword. They were knights. And so, these two young men and this young woman, they were just living their lives. St. Francis, he was a smart man. He knew how to read and how to write, not that much, but he knew enough to be a good merchant. And Chiara, definitely, she knew how to read and write because she was the daughter of a noble family. And they were destined to continue the family's legacy. St. Francis' future was to one day take the ownership of the trade, of the business of his father. And St. Clare, she was destined one day to be the spouse of a noble knight. and to give to this knight children and to continue to build up this family. So this was what it was in store for them. Unfortunately, or providentially, something happened. Because both of them, in their lives, they met Jesus Christ. And that meeting was so strong, so important in their lives, that everything changed. To the point that St. Francis, he renounced to be a wealthy man, belonging to a rich family, with a future as a rich and important merchant in the city of Assisi, in the town of Assisi. And Clare, she renounced to be the spouse of an important knight and to build up the family. In those times, the families, they were very important, which means the individual had less relevance as we do today. Our society is completely different. In those times, all the effort is in building up the family, because they knew that having children and grandchildren and then continuing, then the legacy of nobility would be passed over. And so this family will grow in importance and power and relevance, and maybe even to become more acquainted with the Pope or the Emperor. In those times, they were the Emperor and the Pope, they were kind of adversary, because they were both political leaders. And so the idea was to become closer to one or the other and to get something important. But when Christ came into the picture, everything changed. And both of them, in different ways, and I explain you how, they broke with their families. St. Francis' family, they were outraged at what this young man was doing. They thought he was crazy. The father even followed him and found him in one of the churches that he was restoring with his hands. From being a rich merchant, he was just doing the work of a poor craftsman. So he went, brought him back home, get to him for good, and put him in chain in the cellar of the house. So this is how things were going. So the families, they were really upset at what he was doing. But then his mother, he was compassionate and just couldn't accept that his son would be kept as a captive, as a prisoner in his own house, so set him free, and Francis went away. So he started his journey that then made of him the man that we all know today, the saint that we all know. But even St. Clare, she was destined to be the spouse of a knight, to be a noble woman and to have noble children. She renounced to all that. She escaped from home. She had some nerve, eh? She was brave. She escaped from home and she went and joined St. Francis and his brothers. And there is the story that that night she escaped from home. She went to the place where the brothers were, in St. Mary of the Angels, a little church called the Porziuncola, in the countryside, maybe a couple of kilometers from Assisi, and they cut her hair. She had beautiful long hair. That was one of the signs of beauty for a woman in those times, and she wanted to cut it as an offer to God and as a sign of consecration. This was terrible for the family, because they went to bring her back home, and they were ready to beat the brothers and even to talk with her in some kind of a harsh way. But when they saw that she cut the hair, they couldn't do anything. Because when you cut your hair, that means that you are consecrated. From that moment on, families, they don't have jurisdiction any longer on their sons and daughters. So they had just to turn back, go back home, and be upset with her for the rest of her life, even though she became a great saint. She founded the female branch of the Minors, the group that St. Francis founded, and she is still remembered as the spiritual mother of all the sisters, active and contemplative, and she's also a great inspiration for the brothers. Because after St. Francis died, well, we, the brothers, because we are a bunch of good guys, we start to relax a little bit, so we can do this, but maybe it's better not to do that, and we can, relax a little bit. We don't need to be that strong with our commitments. But St. Clare, she said, no, we are here to be faithful to what St. Francis told us to do and to be. So she's the one that kept the tradition and the spirit strong. She was. If it wasn't for Mother Clare, God knows what would have happened to the Franciscans. Maybe the whole group would have disbanded. But because of her strength and inspiration and prayer, then the Franciscans, they were able to overcome the moment of transition after the death of St. Francis, and today we still have Franciscans thanks to her. So they both began a new life, a life rooted and founded on the gospel. There were religious, monks, nuns, and conservative people in the church already, but what they realized is that they wanted to live a life with a strong commitment, a radical commitment to the gospel, which means they said, we want to read the gospel and we want to live according to what the gospel says, which is a lot, eh? Because our Lord Jesus Christ, he renounced to everything. He was poor, he was chaste, he was obedient unto death, and death on the cross. That was the standard that St. Francis wanted to live. And that was the same standard that St. Clare chose for herself. And both of them, they offered that for their brothers and their sisters. And you know, after centuries, still this spirit is present in the church. The greatest miracle of St. Francis and St. Clare is that today there are still some people who want to become a brother or a sister, which is amazing. After 800 years, Francis and Clare, they're still an inspiration. Let me say something about their stories and a little premise about their times, because it's important to remember that St. Francis and St. Clare, they lived at the end of the Middle Ages, which is an amazing time of our story. Sometimes it's dismissed as the Dark Ages, so it's all one thing. So everybody was poor, everybody was illiterate, everybody was oppressed. Well, it's more complicated than this. Especially because when we think about Middle Ages, the medieval times, we are talking about 1,000 years. From the end of the 5th century until the end of the 15th century. So it's 1,000 years. So many things happened in the time. It is true that when the Roman Empire collapsed, Europe was in great turmoil. And barbarians, they were raiding everywhere, they were installing new kingdoms, a new system of power. And because the Roman Empire collapsed, all the system of culture and economy and society just collapsed with it. So it needed to be rebuilt. It was rebuilt with some of the understanding from the ancient Roman Empire, but so much came from these new peoples that were coming. And so many new things they were born in those times. Plus, around the year 1000, a great gift came from the Arabs. The Muslims, they were born as a religion, and then they started to expand their political dominion around the Mediterranean Sea in the end of the 7th, beginning of the 8th century. And they expanded. But there were a bunch of, bad people just wanted to destroy. They were a highly civilized culture. And because of them, in Europe was imported philosophy, maths, physics, a lot of our understanding of what optics, which means the technology, the science that is behind the glasses that we use, is coming from them. They also brought back to Europe the writings of ancient philosophers that are at the foundation of our understanding of the Christian doctrine. So it's a wonderful time of our history that sometimes is just dismissed, but it's very complex and very beautiful. Towards the end of it, St. Francis and St. Clare, they were born. It's a time when things that start to change. New technologies, new sciences are implemented. And one of them is agriculture. Before, the idea is that, a nobleman, he has a bunch of people under him. They go in the fields with their hoes, and they just till the ground, and they throw seed, and something hopefully will come out. Now technology changes, because there is the implementation of the plow that before wasn't used. The plow that is dragged not by people, but by the oxen, that provides a much better way of cultivating. They start to implement new technologies and new plants. They start to rotate the fields. If you cultivate over the same thing in the same place, after a while, the ground gets poor. And stuff doesn't grow any longer. That's why they were changing. Today you plant potatoes, tomorrow you plant wheat, another day you plant salad or whatever it is, and you provide lots of food. Because there is more food, population grew. So there are more people living in Europe and in that part of Italy. More people means more needs. And now you need craftsmen that need to provide clothes and tools and all the things that are needed by a society that is growing. Another thing that you need is goods to trade. Because people are getting richer. And they don't want just to store gold in their cellars. They want to do something beautiful for themselves. And this is why all this society change in Europe guaranteed that traveling was safe. Before it wasn't, but now it is. That's why St. Francis' father, he can take his horse or his donkey and travel all the way to France, which we are talking about a couple of months traveling, buy the beautiful fabrics from Normandy and bring them back and sell them. So he did that for his whole life, and his father before him. So after a while, he becomes a rich man. And now if you're rich, what do? You have to invest. You have to buy houses, you have to buy fields, and fields will provide more wealth for your family. So you see how things are changing, are growing. Another thing that happens is people, they start to want to get news. Sometimes St. Francis is depicted as a guy who loved music, loves to sing. There is a beautiful image of St. Francis that used to go in the woods, and he took 2 sticks, and with the 2 sticks was imagining to play the violin and singing in French. And people, they are amazed about this thing. They think he's a poet. Well, maybe he was a poet, and he was, but he was also a very normal young man of his age. If you think about the young fellows that come to church, and they have their stuff, their earplugs, and their devices to hear music. And they hear music in English, in Italian, in French, in German, in, I don't know, maybe some of the Asian languages. They are doing the same thing. So St. Francis was singing the pop songs of his times. And was different, but was the same principle, the same thing. So this is just to explain how the society was changing. Another important thing, this new class of rich people, they wanted to have also a voice in the politics. They said, we are not any longer unable to take responsibility. We can, and we want. So they start to build the structures in their groups that will guarantee them to raise their voices and to have their voices heard in the cities, in the countries. But there was still the idea that those who are important in society are noble. And this is why St. Francis, he wanted to become a knight. He wasn't a knight, he wanted to become one. This is why several times in his youth, during his young age, he tried to wear an armor. His father bought him a sword, a horse, and a few times he tried to go to war, to make a name for himself, and to be made a knight by the noble people who were in need of help from him and the other young fellows of Assisi. In this changing society, a big component that is changing too is the church. Unfortunately, not for the best. Because the church in those times is very corrupted. Very, very corrupted. Because the Pope is busy with politics, because he is one of the most important sovereigns in Europe, and he's trying to protect his power and to keep his lands, maybe to expand them. And he's trying to deal with politics with the other kings, with the emperor. So it's very complicated. So the Pope is busy. The cardinals, usually, they're taken from noble families, very important noble families, and they're trying to protect the interests of their own families. Maybe you all heard about the Borgia popes. Well, they were a bunch of good guys. They were cardinals before, and they were made cardinals because the Borgia family from Spain was very powerful. So again, not too much spirituality, but a lot of politics. And the bishops is the same, because the bishop is a powerful man in the diocese, which means in the territory where he's ruling. And priests, they're just not looked after. So they do what they can, but they don't understand much, they don't study, they do a little bit of ministry, but maybe don't even know what they're doing. So this is the picture of the church, very desolating. In those times also the religious orders, they were in great crisis, especially the Benedictine order. They started in the 8th century, and they were a great power to bring Christianity and to bring Europe together. But after many years, even then, they became rich and powerful, and so all the interest in the depth of the spirituality was lost. So in this landscape, still the Holy Spirit was talking with the hearts of many men and women, inspiring them to fall in love with Jesus Christ and to give their lives to Jesus Christ. This is what has happened with Francis and St. Clare. When St. Francis was young, as I said, he was a rich, very regular young man, like everybody else, who didn't think too much about his faith. Maybe he went to church on Sunday with his family because it was an obligation, but for the rest he didn't care. He was very vain, very, very vain. He loved to dress up. He wanted to become a knight. And because of his ambition, he ended up in a battle between the town of Assisi and the city of Perugia. We didn't end up well, because Assisi was defeated, and St. Francis, he was brought to Perugia, and he was kept in prison for 1 year. Now, prisons in those times, they were a little bit different, because today we try to support and help the inmates to rebuild a life. We take care of them, because we cannot just leave them in a cell or in a prison to die. But in those times, a prison is a space with one door locked, a couple of windows with gates, and that's it. No heat, no light, no washroom, no nothing. And the prisoners, they eat. If some people, they come, and out of the goodness of their hearts, they will bring them food. If not, no food. So this is what St. Francis went through for a whole year. At the end of this year, St. Francis went back home. But he was a changed man. Why? Because now he understands what suffering is about. And on this experience, Jesus Christ touches his heart. And from that moment on, St. Francis doesn't care any longer about the wealth of his father. But he finds himself happy and at peace in prayer. That's the way that Christ enters his heart, more and more and more and more. The father thought, okay, maybe he's just in shock for what has happened, so left him alone. But then after a while, St. Francis continued. And one of the things that St. Francis did was, okay, I want not just to pray, dedicate my life to prayer, I want to restore churches. Because the tradition says that one day St. Francis was traveling, he entered inside of an old church that was all broken. He went inside and he started to pray in front of an old and dirty crucifix. And the crucifix spoke to him and said, Francis, go and repair my church, because as you see, it's falling down. St. Francis heard the voice of Christ. Francis, go and repair my church, because as you see, it's falling down. Now, St. Francis was a simple man, so he couldn't understand about restoring the spirituality of the church. What did he know? And probably he didn't even think about it, because I am only one man, what can I do? So he had a good idea. You know what, if I had to restore the church, probably the Lord is talking about this church. And so he took concrete, he took stones, and he started to rebuild it. This was the way that St. Francis was answering to Jesus Christ's call. So he fixed 3 churches, and when he was fixing the 3rd one, the father, at that point, he had enough. So he went, took him back home, put him in chains, spoke with him in a way that he would understand, and left him there. But then, as I said, the mother, full of compassion, set the son free, and St. Francis went right back to fix the church. Because his love for Christ was so strong, because of the inspiration that he received, he believed in it so much, he didn't mind to go against his father and to leave everything to go and repair a church, to put together bricks and stones. That is amazing. The great bravery of his choice. Now the father at that point was very upset, and so he wanted to bring his son to court. But because the son, Francis, at that point was already entering inside of the consecrated world, the consecrated stage, he had to go in front of the bishop to be judged. And the father accused his son in front of everybody and said, "You bishop, grant me justice. This son of mine stole my money." St. Francis, in front of the bishop, said, "Father, from now on I will call Father only my Father in heaven. This is what is yours." And gave back to him the money that he had, gave him back the mantle, gave him back all his clothes. And he remained naked in the square of Assisi, in front of the whole town that was laughing at him. But St. Francis said, if my father wants to use these clothes and this money to keep me chained to do what I don't believe I have to do, preventing me to go and follow Christ, I give everything back. And he did it literally, because he remained naked. And the story says that the bishop, he was surprised, took a cloak and wrapped St. Francis, because he wouldn't leave him naked in the middle of the square. And so, from the point on, the father just denied him, went away, and St. Francis remained alone, with the blessing of the bishop. What did St. Francis do? He continued to do exactly the same thing, because he went back to restore the church, to live as a consecrated, as a penitent, which means a person that is constantly converting to God. And for 2 years, he was alone in this task, with this great commitment. People, they thought he was crazy. When he was walking around Assisi, the kids, they used to take stones and mud and throw at him, because they thought he was, a little bit of cuckoo. So they were taking advantage of him. But he was consistent, to the point that after 2 years, other young men from Assisi, they went to follow him. And the first two, they were Pietro Cattani and Bernardo di Quintavalle. We have the names. One was a lawyer and the other one was a knight. They went to him and said, "Francis, we believe that you received a special inspiration from Christ. We want to follow you. What do you think we should do?" So they opened the gospel. They found the part that says, "Leave everything behind and follow me." And so they did. That was the beginning of the Franciscans in that moment. And so together they chose to be poor. Why poor? Because if you are poor, you are free. If you have nothing, nothing binds you. If you don't owe anything to anybody except the charity of Christ, you're the most free man in the world. This is what St. Francis found. The same freedom of Christ. A freedom that he pursued for his whole life, and that inspired so many men that after not even 20 years, there were thousands of Franciscan friars, Franciscan brothers, that were following him. St. Francis continued in this road, remaining poor and free for his whole life, to the point that out of the great depth of love of Christ, he was transformed into Christ. That's why St. Francis, in the last years of his life, he received a stigmata, like Padre Pio, same thing. Unfortunately, his life wasn't long. He died when he was 43, because too much fasting, too much penance, too much hardship, and the wounds of Christ that were definitely being a strain on him. The story says also that he had an infection in his eye that he brought back when he went to visit the Holy Land. And finally, St. Francis died. Only a few months after, he was proclaimed as a saint by the Pope, and people, they were fighting around the remains of his body because they wanted him to be in their town as a relic. So the brothers, they fought to keep him with the brothers in the brothers' church. And still St. Francis is there. And thousands, maybe millions of pilgrims, they go every year to visit him. I did a few times. And I hope that maybe one day we'll be able to do that together. Now, this is about Francis. What about Clare? What about our mother Clare? She was this young girl belonging to this noble family. Tradition says that she was a little shy, she was very reserved, she loved to pray, and she loved to do acts of charity as her mother taught her. That's why possibly, even when she was in Perugia for a time, maybe she was bringing food to the prisoners. And she was giving her food and her good things to the poor, to the needy. She was helping those who were sick. So she was very devoted since when she was young. Now, even though she was a very devoted and holy girl, her destiny still was to become the spouse of a noble man. But something happened. Because through her cousin, that became a brother, she got to know about St. Francis. So the story says that they met. St. Francis explained to her what the life of poverty is about, and she fell in love, not with Francis, but with the life of poverty, because it's the life of Christ. And so it took a while for her to bring things together, to make a decision, and apparently, according to the tradition, on Palm Sunday, with the advice of the bishop, she went to church with her family, and she was beautifully dressed. She was at the top. She was so beautiful. That night she went back home. She dismissed all her beautiful clothes. She put on herself a poor garb, and she escaped. Now, in those times, the noble houses, they had two entrances. The main one, the big portal, which is the important one, where you have big guests, you have them entering through that. That represents the importance of the family. It's like having a beautiful facade of a church like ours. Everybody sees it. In her house, the house of a noble family of the Scifi, there was also the back door that is called the door of the dead. Why? Because when there is a death in the family, you don't bring the remains, the casket, to the main door. It's a matter of being reserved, it's a matter of respect. So you use the door of the dead. That is always closed, except when someone dies and has to be brought out of the house. So what has happened that night? St. Clare, when everybody was sleeping, she went downstairs, she went to the part of the house where the door of the dead is. It took a while to take everything from it. She opened the door of the dead and she came out. It's even beautiful to think about the symbol. St. Clare, that day, that night, she died to her previous life, the life of a noble woman. And she started the adventure to become a saint, to live the life of a saint. And so in the night, St. Clare, she was running through the streets of Assisi. She came out of the walls of the town, God knows how many, and then she started to run on the countryside. And as I said, a couple of kilometers to get to Santa Maria della Porziuncola, Santa Maria degli Angeli, this little church where the brothers were. The story says that she arrived, her cousin received her, and she approached the church with all the brothers into lines, with torches in their hands, to enlighten the night. And she entered the church, and there St. Francis, with a couple of with scissors, he cut her hair and consecrated her to God. This is how she started. Everything started in that night. The night that Clare died, and she was born again as the bride of Christ, to become a saint. The story doesn't finish because it's a beautiful night, but then it's the next morning. And now we need to find a place for St. Clare, because she cannot be with the brothers. Come on, we cannot do that. And so the first thing that happened is St. Francis, with other two companions, they brought her to an abbey nearby where there were some Benedictine sisters. But St. Clare didn't want to stay there. She said, no, I want to be a Franciscan nun, not a Benedictine nun. St. Francis said, so far we don't have a place, so you stay here, which was a blessing, because when the family of Clare, they got to hear what took place, the father with the uncle and the cousins and the servants, they all jumped on their horses, and with their swords, they went looking for her. So they went and practically they sieged the abbey where she was, they entered, and they were trying to pull her away. And at those times, people, they weren't kind to each other. So they just were trying to grab her and bring her back home. So the tradition says that she grabbed the altar of the church not to be moved. And in the fight, someone unveiled her, and they finally found out that she cut her hair, which means from that sign they realized that now she's consecrated, so we don't have any more authority over her. And so they had to leave, and they were quite frustrated. Probably they hated her for that, because it was a humiliation for the family. And so St. Clare was left alone, but after a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, her sister did the same. And again, the family was upset and were trying to reach her. There was another fight in another abbey. So, okay, let's let that go. Let's just say that many women, they decided to follow Clare and her example. A life of poverty, that in that time for a woman was very hard. Because in that society, there wasn't any kind of attention to the needs of a woman. It was a violent society. And so, with great bravery, they decided to live together as consecrated sisters. In the meantime, Francis and the brothers, they finished to fix the church of San Damiano, and they prepared a little abode for the sisters just nearby. So finally they could leave the Benedictine Abbey, and they went to live in San Damiano, where they started what is called the Poor Clare Order, founded by St. Clare. And all of them, they chose and committed to live in poverty. St. Clare was a noble woman with a great spirituality, a great sensitivity for spiritual things and for artistic things. But she was also a tough cookie, because many priests and bishops and cardinals and popes, they tried to impose on her a different lifestyle. They were saying, listen, you're a bunch of women here. You cannot live in poverty. You have to live closed inside, with the door closed and the gates. You don't go out and nobody comes in. You need to have land and people to farm your land so that you will have an income. And you need to own things that you need. And the answer was, no, forget it. We'll never do it. She fought for her whole life with at least 2 popes that were trying to impose on her to own things. And she said, no, my life is a life of poverty. I don't want anything. And finally, the last 2 weeks of her life, finally the Pope, Gregory IX, he approved her rule. And still today, the Franciscan sisters, they have the privilege of living poverty as Jesus Christ and his poor mother, Mary, did. Everything started there. And as I said, compared to the brothers, the sisters, they've been more faithful. Somehow even today, it's something similar, but you know, it's behind the curtain. Now, what is the spiritual legacy that we receive from St. Francis and St. Clare? Let's say this, that there is a reality in the world that is called the Franciscan family. To the Franciscan family belong the brothers, the contemplative sisters, the active sisters, the lay consecrated, the secular Franciscans, all the friends that somehow they participate to the spirit in a more formal way, in a more structured way. We are talking about over 50,000 people in the world, consecrated in the spirit of St. Francis. And there are friends in other Christian denominations. Surprisingly, there are Franciscans also in the Anglican Church, and there are friends also in other religions. Among Muslims, there are some Buddhists or Hindus who have some kind of association, and we have friends everywhere. One of the beautiful things that have happened under John Paul II was the day of prayer in Assisi. A day when the Pope, he went to Assisi to pray with the brothers, and he invited religious leaders from all over the world to pray together in different ways for peace in the world. That is what the Franciscan spirit is. It's a crazy spirit. And the Franciscans of Halifax, which means the family to which myself and Sister Rita belong, we are part of this. We are just the last sprout that came out of the same tree, that continues to generate children, sons and daughters. I wouldn't be surprised if in these past 15 years, since when we were founded, another or more Franciscan new groups are born. Because it's a spirit that always renews itself, always. And now we have another piece of this family, because now we are the parish of St. Francis and St. Clare. So we are part of the Spirit in a new way. So how do we let ourselves be inspired by St. Francis and St. Clare? Well, my hope is that with years and with time, this spirit will be shared with everybody. Just to give you a few little points, maybe today, as an inspiration for your prayer and for your reflection, and hopefully to be witnesses for Jesus Christ. Not the Christ of the mystical Christ, but the incarnated Christ. Christ who walked on earth. A special connection, a great love for his humanity, his holy humanity. Jesus Christ who shared with sinners, who shared with his friends. Jesus Christ who was sleepy because he slept on the boat during the storm. Jesus Christ who was hungry. Jesus Christ who cried. Jesus Christ who got upset and frustrated, like we heard this morning in the gospel. This Christ, this is the greatest love of the Franciscans, the humanity of Christ. The second thing is the greatest love for the church. And it's true that sometimes the church can be disappointing, make us upset, and on and on and on. St. Francis, he had the same experience. But we love greatly the church, because the church makes Jesus Christ present in the sacrament. This is something that for St. Francis was so clear. One of his most beautiful writings is his testament. When he was dying, he left a few lines to his brothers, to us, to brothers and the sisters. He said, this is what is most important. The greatest devotion for the church and for priests, even if they're ignorant, even if they don't know anything, even if they're bad and they give scandal, forget the stuff. Because the most important thing is that through their hands, and their hands alone, we can receive Jesus Christ in his body and blood. And the Eucharist is the only thing in this world that I can touch of our Lord Jesus Christ. Again, the sense of touching was so important for St. Francis. The incarnation, the humanity. Humanity needs to see, to hear, to touch, to kiss, to hug. And the only thing that we can do on this world to hug, kiss, and savor Jesus Christ is to receive him in the Eucharist. This is why the great love for the church. Is the church able to scandalize everybody who would like to punch people in the head? I do at least once a day or more, including myself. So I wouldn't be surprised if you would like to do the same with me, which is okay. But still, the church is the one that brings Christ in the sacrament. Another point that is extremely important is the freedom of the gospel, which is the reason to accept to be poor. We want to be free to follow Christ. Everything in the world is beautiful, and our world is so amazing. But all these things, they are no good if they make us slaves. If I am chained to the beautiful things of the world, I cannot run after Christ. This is why the freedom of the gospel. This is why poverty is freedom. And sometimes to renounce to something is good. Not because the things are bad, but because we want to be free. Because when I'm free, my heart can be given completely to Jesus Christ. That's the choice of poverty. It's not because me and Sister Rita, we don't like stuff. I like a beautiful car, I do, or a beautiful motorbike. I would love to travel. But is that important? Yes, it is. Is it more important than my freedom that grants me to love Christ as much as I do? No, it doesn't. So forget the motorbike. Forget the beautiful car. The fourth point, universal fraternity. On this planet, we are all brothers and sisters. Because according to our faith, we have one Father in heaven, the one who made all of us. So every person that we meet is a brother or a sister. Could be a troublemaker, brother or sister. Could be a brother or sister we like to punch. That's okay, but still, we are all brothers and sisters. And the way that we reach out to our brothers and sisters is with this understanding. Respecting our brothers and sisters for where they are. if you expect them to be different people than they are, it's an act of injustice. That's cruel. St. Francis wrote it, do not expect that your brothers will be better Christians than they are. Love them in the place where they are. He also wrote some lines about going for the mission. In those times, the mission was understood as we go to a place that is populated by Muslims, we start to preach Christ, and in the best case scenario, they will convert. In the worst one, we'll become martyrs because they will kill us. So, simple as that. I mean, not too much to discuss. St. Francis wrote, when we go in the lands of the Muslim, live there as a good person. And just tell people, do not deny that you're a Christian. If the Lord will give the grace to someone to ask questions, then speak about Jesus Christ. But the first thing that you have to do, live with them. Live there. Be part of that society, of that context. Love people, meet people. And leave the Holy Spirit to do his job. This is the way that I understand mission. This is the way that I will understand. I hope that we'll all understand what mission is about. And finally, is a mystical glance on creation. Sometimes St. Francis is understood to be the patron of ecology, which he is. Sometimes we can think about him with the fawn on the side and the bunny on the shoulder, the little bird on the head, and the wolf on the side, which is nice, it's good, it's okay. But that's not really Francis. It's not because he didn't like fawns and bunnies and birds. The point is that when he was looking at nature, he wasn't looking at trees and animals, even though they're beautiful. When St. Francis looked at nature, he saw God. He was able to have a mystical sight. And in a tree, he saw the sign of the presence of the Creator. In the beautiful landscape of his land, with beautiful plains and mountains, he was able to see the presence of God Almighty, the Creator. This is why St. Francis loved nature, and Franciscan will still love nature. Why? Because in nature we can meet our Creator. We can see him. We can see his footprints, his fingerprints. These are the things that I believe are important to know about St. Francis and St. Clare. I hope I wasn't too long. And I think these are, as I said, these are the most important things, just as a beginning, and maybe there is material to reflect and meditate, and hopefully to share with some people that have an interest. If they don't, that's okay. We'll live with them as brothers and sisters. Then one day, hopefully, they will be inspired. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have time. Eventually, someone would like to ask some questions.
Sure. If anybody has a question. I was just wondering when we did get our new name, why it was St. Francis and St. Clare, because it's not, I know of no other parish that has the two saints. You've clarified it today as to the importance of the two people together. It's very good. Very good.
Yes. As St. Francis, he never said the brothers but the sisters. He had such an open heart. The same was for Jesus Christ. Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that. Yes. You had a question, or was I so amazing that? Thank you very much. God bless you.